Hello and welcome to Florida Basketball Hour. I am Neil Blackman, Saturday Down South. On this episode, Eric Fawcett is going to join me, GatorCountry.com, Burner Ball. We're going to talk all things Florida's 95-69 first-round NCAA tournament dub over the Norfolk State Spartans. The Gators obviously came out and played a fantastic first 16 minutes of this game, really first 18 minutes of this game. And then we're a little lethargic for kind of 20 minutes. I thought they closed pretty well, to be quite honest. I thought Florida kind of righted the ship the last few minutes of the game. And ultimately, as I tweeted out, Florida won by 26, which was the projection on Bart Torvik that they would win by 26. They won by 1 point more than the KenPom projection. So Florida did kind of what they were supposed to do, if you believe in predictive models. And so it's weird to have concerns about a game where Florida led by 32. And I think you have to kind of tip your hat to Norfolk State for the way that they competed. They didn't fold. They kept playing. And they honestly, I thought, executed what their clear plan was pretty well for about 20 minutes, which was to get downhill and drive Florida. And Florida, I thought, kind of wisely dropped pick and roll coverage because Norfolk State doesn't shoot the ball well. So Florida was a little less in the gaps than they usually are, but they still had a lot of trouble keeping Norfolk State in front of them. And a lot of that was concerning. There's certainly things that if Florida plays either Danny Hurley or Porter Moser, they will see on film and certainly be able to exploit. So a concerning 20 minutes, I think, is probably fair, but man, a 26-point first round NCAA tournament win is something you will take any day of the week as well.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things, while there was the 11-0 kind of meltdown, run for Norfolk State, and people on Twitter were melting down a little bit. I do think it's worth noting and really provides a lot of the context. I mean, how often this year have I pointed out lineup data, or in the last couple of years pointed out lineup data that explain things? I mean, it was pretty clear that Florida didn't want to play their starters a heavy minute load, and a lot of the bench pieces were just kept out there during that run that Norfolk State went on. And I just think if it was another situation or another team where the Gators didn't have to play in 2 nights, I think they get the starters back in there earlier and things get back to normal. So that's another thing, that if you wanted to look at the score by lineup, Florida's starters went ballistic. They're up by 1,000. The bench came in. Norfolk State went on their surge back to kind of make it whatever it got down to. And then once Florida starters got back in, then it ballooned back up to whatever it, ultimately into the middle 20s, and then it was garbage time. So I do think that's kind of worth noting, that I think the outcome would have been different if Florida's starters were playing 34 minutes instead of 28. And, this is somewhat of a debt. I mean, I'll be honest, Neil, and I don't know where you fell on this, but there was certainly a time, I know multiple people on Twitter were talking about how Florida's bench would be a top 25 team on their own. And I kind of thought that was outrageous. Not that this is a 1 game or a 5-minute sample, but let's look at Florida's bench giving up an 11-0 run to Norfolk State as just an example of maybe they're not, back-to-back champion UConn coming off the bench for the Gators. Again, I do think Florida's bench is really good, and Florida's bench should have handled Norfolk State a little bit easier. That's certainly why Golden trusted them. But again, that's why I'm not super concerned. And again, I think to some extent, this is a team that's going to run really hot and run really cold. This is the nature of having a team that plays super emotionally. You see when they play with incredible amounts of joy, they go on those runs like we saw in the first half. And then because they are a team that plays pretty free and loose, it means that sometimes you're going to give up runs on the other end. So I do think that's the give and take for a team that has the identity that they do. And I think that's one of the situations that, you just kind of deal with it. So, my overall concern level with this is not super high. And I mean, it's one of those things that Florida not being able to keep some guys in front of them for 10 minutes when the game was still felt kind of not in the balance. I've had concerns with Florida's perimeter defense before. So I will have it again. These are not new issues. Is some of the turnovers that Florida has. I mean, that's the turnover issues we've had some concern with all season long. Again, they do play somewhat loose at times. That's nothing new playing against Norfolk State in the first round of the NCAA tournament. So I do feel like we got the full Florida experience in this game, both the good and the bad. And therefore, I really do think that, like you mentioned, that this was very close to the projections from Torvik and Ken Pom. This is the team we know. This is what we saw tonight. Exactly the thing we have seen all season long. That isn't to say you shouldn't look at some of the things that went wrong and say that the Florida has issues, but this is nothing like new that has popped up, and Florida's had the warts that they've had and went on to have a 1 seed and won the SEC tournament. So it is possible to look at those warts and point out why this team isn't perfect, as very few teams, or maybe zero teams, are in the history of basketball. But yeah, and I mentioned this in our prep for Norfolk State. I mentioned it in my writing for Gator Country, of which a lot of people were like, well, this Norfolk State team, you make them sound like they're going to, beat the Gators, which I certainly didn't think or didn't mean to do. And I also went on Stadium and Gale and talked about how I thought the Gators were going to win easily, but at the same time, people were going to come away from it having a lot of respect for head coach Robert Jones and these Norfolk State players. I think that I did pretty well on that evaluation. I have a lot of respect for that Norfolk State team. I think that they should have been a 15 or a 14 seed and maybe could have given someone else some more issues, as you saw for a little bit. But yeah, I do think there was a little bit of overreacting in the communities that I were looking at, such as Twitter and the Gator Country forums, for a game that the Gators ultimately won quite handily.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. The only tweet I'd sent with any level of high concern was there was that 8-minute stretch where Norfolk State was scoring at like a 1.4 point per possession clip.
And crazy.
Like, I might have called a timeout if I were Todd Golden. And that's, all I kind of wanted to see was Florida, because they can run hot and cold, and they've even had the little fireball on Evan Mia this year as a team that is particularly streaky. They don't usually give up kill shots, which they gave up today. But I do think Todd's timeout usage has actually improved as a coach this year. But this would have been one where, I think you have to ignore the scoreboard and kind of watch what's happening. And I might have used a timeout earlier just to stem that bleeding and kind of recenter the team. But that was really the only striking concern. And I'll point out, I think Eric's right. Like, I thought Norfolk State was a little better than that. And for perspective, they came in Ken Pom and Torvik right around where Robert Morris was. We all saw Robert Morris give Alabama the business for 40 minutes and very nearly steal that game. And Norfolk State was kind of who they are today, right? They're a team that's really good at finishing at the rim, top 100 in the country, despite the level of their competition and effective field goal percentage. Top 100 in the country at 2-point field goal percentage. They were kind of who they were, and then they're a terrible defensive rebounding team. Well, I think Florida got – what did Florida get? 21 offensive rebounds. So that held, and they're a pretty good offensive rebounding team on their own, and Norfolk State got 12 offensive rebounds, which is pretty good. So they kind of were who they were, and Florida – was fine. I mean, they were ahead 53-21, which I think is, I also tweeted that, kind of lost in the shuffle of those minutes that everyone was melting down over was the fact that Florida was ahead by 32 points about 17 minutes into the game. But yeah, I mean, some good minutes to Eric's point off the bench. I thought Micah Hanlockton was very good. Again, 8 rebounds, 6 points, some really strong hands and tough finishes. He actually had 3 assists, which was, I think, third on the team in assists tonight in a game when Florida had 20 assists and moved the ball pretty well. I thought Denzel Aberdeen was good offensively while being not really himself defensively. He got cooked a little bit in a couple switches. Was a little disappointed in his defense. I think he can guard better. But, yeah, I mean, this Florida's bench is a top 25 team stuff. this is all the evolution of what happened when this team became really, really good. And the reality was, entering the season, they were 31st in Evan Mia, 36th in Torvik, 25th in Kinpom, 25th in the AP poll. And some things hit. I mean, they hit on the development of Alex Condon, Walter Clayton. Eric has made multiple videos about Walter Clayton that are fantastic. Go to patreon.com/Florida BB Hour and subscribe. And if you subscribe to any of the $3 or $5 tiers, you'll be able to see all the videos Eric's made about Walter Clayton's even exceeded our expectations this year. And then obviously Tommy Houck has developed a little faster than I think, at least I thought he would, Eric. Tommy wasn't great today. I'll also note that Tommy missed 3 threes that went in and out. And I'm not like a conspiracy theorist by any means, but it's not a conspiracy. I really feel like overinflated basketballs were just hard for Thomas Houck to shoot today. And maybe that will change on Sunday. Maybe it won't, but there's a great thing. Will Warren is a pretty good Twitter follow. And he retweeted somebody and it said the first round is on pace to be one of the top 5 bricklaying conventions in the history of the NCAA tournament. And 3 of those 5 have come in the last 5 years. And if you follow the sport, you know that the last few years, one of the big complaints has been they overinflate the basketball at the NCAA tournament. And I'm telling you, it happened again. There was a VJ Edgecombe dunk today in the paper where, first of all, he would have topped Christian Ings for dunk of the year had he done it. And he would have put our boy Riley Kugel straight on that poster. But he missed the dunk. And not only did he miss the dunk, but the rebound on the missed dunk went all the way past half court. And I'm sorry, but if you miss a dunk and the rebound goes past half court, the ball has too much air in it, Eric. So I do think these things are at least worth talking about tangentially. But no, I'm not concerned that Florida had kind of a tedious 20 minutes in a game that they were ahead by 30 in the first half.
Yeah, the overinflated ball thing is real for sure. I mean, players are talking about it. So I don't really understand how that happens, to be honest. You would think, I don't know how it gets to this point. So that I guess is where the conspiracy would come in. But whether it is just the using balls that are brand new and haven't been broken in, whether they are overinflated, whatever it is, you're even seeing the amount of turnovers from players just having the ball bounce higher than they expected it to is definitely it's definitely a thing. But it's I thought Houck was good, and again I don't really gauge his play ever by if he's making threes or not. I just think that to be honest with you, I think any threes that you get from Houck are kind of gravy. And I just think he's so much better and better for the team when he is going downhill and using his ability to drive. So I thought he was pretty good. Again, he was kind of out there in that stretch with a bunch of bench pieces. So maybe some moments didn't look great. Who all is responsible for all that? That's for film study to really find out. But you did mention one of the things that I thought was pretty crazy, and I don't have the play-by-play stuff yet because we're recording this just really, really quickly after the game finished. So, which again, I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about this, but UConn and Oklahoma just tipped, so we still don't know who the Gators are going to play, and likely won't talk about it all that much on this podcast. That'll likely be a Patreon thing, which is again a reason why you should subscribe. I'm certainly going to do a Patreon preview for whoever Florida ends up playing, either late tonight or early tomorrow morning. So just if you're looking for in-depth preview of what who Florida is going to play, we just don't know at the moment. But anyways, one of the things that I do think is was a really good kind of stat, I think, is the fact that Florida had 20 assists on 29 made field goals. And I think that when you take away the isolation threes from Walter Clayton, his general isolation buckets, and the offensive rebound putbacks, nearly every field goal Florida had was assisted, which is crazy. Like, even if you look at it right away, 20 of 29, like that assist rate is crazy. Of course, Walter Clayton is always going to have his isolation moments, which are, not going to be assisted. And then Florida's always going to have offensive rebounds, putbacks, which are not assisted. So there's never going to be a game where Florida has every bucket assisted. But for 20 out of 29, that shows the level at which Florida was moving the ball. And I do think that that's kind of a universal ish truth in basketball, that teams that are really playing well offensively, like assists usually follow that. It's kind of hard to put up a high points per possession and have most of your buckets assisted and not be playing well. So I do think that's a good sign. The only reason I said maybe it's not a good sign is, like, again, there were some moments where, of course, Florida was like trying to make the extra pass to a fault, I think. And again, that's part of the Gators kind of playing with joy, playing free and loose is like, and again, we saw like Alex Connon threw one behind his back to Chinyelu, who wasn't expecting it, and it went out of bounds. I think that those are probably the mistakes you deal with, and that's the tax you pay for a team that plays with a lot of joy and also plays unselfishly. So, but that would be, if I was looking for one kind of element to this game and one positive stat for sure, it would certainly be that amount of assists relative to the field goals.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I thought obviously Florida's just presence on the glass was very good, and really the Norfolk offensive rebounds, a lot of them came. They had two like right at the very beginning of the game, and of course they popped the graphic up like a minute and 10 seconds of the game. Offensive rebounds, Norfolk State 2, Florida nothing, and I was like, awesome, good work by the production crew. But yeah, I mean, there weren't very many for Norfolk in the first half. But most of that came with the game very much out of reach. So I thought Florida did a really good job on that front, And again, I mean, Walter Clayton hits the like logo three at the beginning of the game. Just really a third straight excellent first round game for Walter Clayton, and he's finally a winner in the NCAA tournament tonight with the 23 points. 23-point performance. He had 5 rebounds. Thought he was active defensively at times. Got a steal. Actually blocked a shot. So hey, good for Walt. I don't have all the final stats in front of me, but I know he was also a game high plus 25 in box plus minus. So just performed like you'd think an All-American would. And then Elijah Martin, a really good number 2 on a night when Will Richard did not play great. As a whole, certainly on the offensive end, Elijah, 5 for 10, did hit a couple threes. It still had a couple mystifying finishes for me where I thought one, he like tried kind of an off balance layup when I thought he could have taken another step and dunked. And another one where he went for the reverse layup when I think the simple layup would have done. And then he missed a little floater from about 4 feet that I have no idea how he missed, but this is life with Elijah Martin on the offensive end. He still was very good, I thought, very active and aggressive defensively, excellent on the glass. So, kind of vintage Florida, to be honest. And they win by 26. To Eric's point, not going to get too heavy into this game since we don't know who's going to win. I'm looking at it now. It's like 18-13 UConn in the first half. So please go to patreon.com/Florida BB Hour and we'll have stuff up probably by the morning with, kind of prepping for whoever Florida plays on Sunday night, and Raleigh with a berth on the Sweet 16 in the balance.
Yeah, so this is where being the 1 seed does have some benefit. I mean, obviously the Gators did play first. Maybe it's a little too on the margins to suggest that getting a 2.5 or 3 hour advantage in rest really means something. There's some people that suggest it does, some don't. But my stream, so actually, to be honest, Neil, I'm I don't know if I've ever done this before. I never have games on while we podcast. I can't focus. I get into too much into watching it. And as I've probably tripped up over myself talking on this podcast, it's because I'm not used to trying to watch basketball and podcast. But my stream is probably a little bit behind. UConn just made a 3 to make it 21-16. But whatever it is, I mean, Oklahoma and UConn are probably going to play a 40-minute, very competitive, physical game. So, and then on obviously the other side of it, Florida was able to play their starters a little bit less than normal. And while there were certainly moments of physicality and moments where the game was really getting up and down, probably not the same level of intensity and contact that this game is going to have between UConn and Oklahoma. So this is the advantage that the Gators get is they obviously had a nice little push from Norfolk to, I think, wake them up, but not enough that they're going to be fatigued at all going into Sunday. And I do think that's where this game was probably good for the Gators, where they had their kind of were a couple of things. I mean, first of all, they played a team that just runs a set every time down the floor, and guarding set plays has not been a strength of the Gators. We did see that again as one of the negative moments, is just a couple of times where a slice screen got an easy bucket for Norfolk State and the Gators didn't communicate it well, or got backdoor cut because they fell asleep a little bit. So that's kind of nice when you play a team like a Norfolk State, is they're going to expose some of the vulnerabilities. And so again, I like Florida will have plenty of good film for how they need to play a little bit better guarding actions. Obviously, Norfolk State also plays a number of different defenses. Now, they certainly didn't play as much zone as I expected. I thought that they would be playing all kinds of junk defenses. They did it a little bit, but I think that they were scared out of doing that a little bit, which honestly, I thought showed some good confidence from Norfolk State. And then again, I think that there was enough moments that probably if you are, and again, to what extent we think that Florida's, again, I'm particularly looking at the starting guards, to what extent we think they weren't playing at their max effort or energy level defensively. Well, we definitely have moments where it's like, hey, well, these Norfolk State guards were able to burn by you and get to the rim on a number of occasions. We were able to win this game despite of it. You might not be able to beat an Oklahoma or UConn or insert any team down the line. So again, I do think that's where this could work out pretty favorably for the Gators, is that there's certainly teaching moments from this game. They certainly got, I don't want to say they got punched in the mouth. That would be far too dramatic. I mean, the Gators still ran out to a 32-point lead and won comfortably. So I would never say the Gators were punched in the mouth, but there were like moments of jabs to the ribs, of a guy in isolation getting by a guard and finishing with a layup, of a simple slice screen, creating a layup for Norfolk State because the Gators didn't communicate it well. Like there was enough moments like that I think the Gators, or you'd hope the Gators, get woken up a little bit, because it's, and to be quite frank, if that was their best effort, then the Gators do have issues. like let's be real. But I think we have enough sample size this season of the Gators maybe not being an elite defensive team. The numbers still suggest they're arguably elite, but one that's pretty solid.
Yeah, I mean that's and again, I mean they had, what was it, 53-21. If they hadn't given up the kill shot to close the half, everybody would be talking about how marvelous their defense was in the first half too. So, look, I think what happened was, this is another reason to subscribe to patreon.com/FloridaBB Like Eric said, I love Robert Jones. They run some good stuff. I think Eric said, like, I hope that Florida wins comfortably and Norfolk State has some nice moments. And like a kill shot at the end of the first half, Eric, like, that turned a kind of outrageously boring basketball game into something that was a little bit fun and entertaining for the casuals and the neutrals, I'm sure. And Robert Jones had his moment, carving up Florida's top 10 national defense with some nice sets. And Florida got abused on blobs, particularly in the second half, which I do think is something you want to get fixed real quick, because Porter Moser is a certifiable blob god, and I'm sure Danny Hurley, I just don't know his numbers, but I'm sure that he can figure it out. So the point is, like, Yeah, there's things to clean up, but like having the attention of your team and a team as good as Florida is always a good thing. And the Gators do interestingly tend to play up to their level of competition. I saw something that Evan Mia tweeted about like teams that play up to their competition, and like Florida's efficiency numbers tend to balloon when they play teams in the top 25 um, in national efficiency. Now, neither UConn or Oklahoma will be that, but they may as well functionally be in a round of 32 game. So I think Florida will play better on Sunday. If they don't, obviously I'll be surprised. And yeah, Florida could. I think against either of these teams, there's a scenario where Florida could go home. I do think UConn is probably. Look, I've already said I think Florida's better than UConn. I think they'll win. They should win. I think that UConn doesn't match up great with Florida. They match up better than Oklahoma does. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, and again, kind of wish that we could have waited until this game was finished to have a real breakdown. But it is, past 10 p.m. and we're not even close to this Oklahoma UConn game being done. And again, so this is just going to be another reason why you'll have to subscribe to Patreon to get content from me and Neil. But there'll be a whole bunch to get you set for Sunday. But yeah, it's going to be probably a little bit more athleticism and size a little bit from Oklahoma, as well as a little bit of the familiarity from a style of play standpoint. And then a UConn team that, again, I've mentioned a number of times that Florida is not great at guarding actions. And then I didn't even mention this, and I'm glad you pointed out that Florida had a lot of trouble with Norfolk State blobs. Well, you're running you may be playing a team in UConn that just runs more stuff than anyone in the country. So that would be the concern for Florida there. That the UConn roster, again, it's just not. I know a lot of people have the PTSD from past UConn teams that have given Florida issues in big games. And of course, UConn has won 2 consecutive NCAA tournaments, which is outstanding, but it's just not one of those teams. It's one starter from last year's team, and then I just don't like their portal additions. This wasn't a Patreon for this one, but for any of you who might be Burner Ball members, me and Kevin Sweeney did a video on UConn going into the season where we're kind of like, I don't know about this Aiden Mahaney take, even though UConn was just thrilled with that addition, and where he's just kind of a not. He's close to a non-factor. He was a non-factor for stretches this season. So, yeah, again, I picked UConn to win in the bracket, which I also, we both did our brackets on Patreon. I forget who you had winning, but I do think that Oklahoma would be the better matchup. And again, it's funny for us to talk about who we think is going to win, because by the time people listen to this, that game will be completed and Florida will know who they're playing. But yeah, I would be more concerned by the UConn matchup than Oklahoma.
Yeah, I mean, look, Danny Hurley, I think is he's won 12 NCAA tournament games in a row. I think he's like 13 or 14-4 in the NCAA tournament all time. So that's a smaller sample size than some of the great coaches, but it's in the top 5. Billy Donovan was 35-12, if anybody wanted to know, which is preposterously good. Yeah, and that's not as good as 14-4, by the way. So just gives you an idea of like, yeah, I mean, Danny Hurley can coach. They have nice pieces. Solo ball can get super microwavy, which we've seen give Florida trouble. Like the other team's hot shooter goes off, gives everybody trouble. It's not like unique to Florida really, but yeah, he is capable of doing it. Liam McNeely can get you 20 at any point in time. Florida's done a very nice job against elite freshmen this year. I actually think that wouldn't be like, I would again be surprised if Liam McNeely were the difference in a game between Florida and UConn. I do think that the thing that kind of stands out about this Connecticut team, in addition to the stuff that Eric mentioned, is that they just don't defend very well. They especially in high level games, have been very poor on the defensive end. They're just inside the top 100 in KenPom defensive efficiency. The thing that I noted And I didn't even have it right in front of me, kind of pulling it up now. But it actually is markedly worse against quality opposition. So Torvik has that efficiency top 50 number. Yeah, and I mean, their quality efficiency number is 105th since league play started and 85th overall. So they were a little better guarding in non-conference play, but 105th in Big East play against top 50 opponents. So they do have trouble getting stops. So if they beat Florida, I think the most likely scenario would be like a very high-scoring game that UConn was able to win. UConn will. I've heard, people say, oh, well, UConn will slow Florida down. They'll make Florida guard for 30 seconds. They'll lower the possessions in the game. And I think that's somewhat true, but I still can't imagine a scenario where in like a 65 possession game, Florida lost. I think you're looking at like a 75 possession type game where UConn just outscores Florida because they make shots. Oklahoma, yeah, I mean, they have okay size in the sense that they have a bunch of switchable dudes. They don't really have much in terms of front court size. We've seen this be a problem. We saw it as a huge problem for them in the second half, in particular in Gainesville. Now, I will say I thought that they guarded Florida pretty well in the first game, and maybe Fawcett will see this when he goes back. And I thought Florida made shots at home. Like Florida hit a couple logo threes. Florida did a couple things, just kind of shot them out of what defenses that they were in. And, you can't guarantee that would happen with overinflated balls on a neutral floor. But it's still a better matchup for the Gators, I think, just because Florida's size is so overwhelming. And the way that Oklahoma got run out of a few games in the SEC this year was just being unable to compete for 40 minutes on the glass. And that is just such a problem against Florida, and not having an answer for any of Florida's front court pieces, and maybe not even Tommy Houck. All of that can become problematic. But to see more of that, you'll have to go to the Patreon because, honestly, this game's not over. I think Eric probably still has work to do. I still have work to do, but we wanted to get something up. Florida routs Norfolk State 95-69, Gators' largest margin of victory in an NCAA tournament game in over a decade. Very impressive, I thought, first performance by Florida, particularly in the opening half. So the Gators advance. They will play Sunday. They will have a couple more hours of rest. One programming note before I send it to Eric for any final thoughts on a sign-off. It's actually a lot of you know I have a daughter with autism. And doing this show has been mainly it's been great because I get to podcast with Eric. And we just get to talk about basketball. And honestly, for 6 years, that kind of kept us going. And then this season has been really special and everything that I hoped for when I started this podcast, to be quite honest. Maybe one day they'll give me some sort of pregame radio gig at Florida or something like that, and I'll get to do even more cool stuff with Florida basketball, which is something that I love and I know about and am knowledgeable about. The point is, the only thing more important to that to me is my autistic daughter, and it's her birthday Sunday. So I will be at Epcot Center where she wanted to go. Amazing. And there's a decent chance that I will not even see part of this game. Our Twitter will be silent. It will be very weird for all of you. And for those of you who know me and know how much I care about Florida basketball, care about the sport of basketball, and have devoted really a lot of the free time I have in life to basketball, you probably know how hard that will be for me, but Lizzie's more important. So, hopefully the Gators win and I get to go to San Francisco in the Sweet 16 and I'll get to see this wonderful team play live again. But there's a chance I won't Sunday. So you all please hold down the fort for me. I rarely am sentimental on our shows, but I've had so much fun this season. And hopefully it's not going to be the last time on Sunday night.
Yeah, well, I hope you have just an amazing time. I know it's going to be super special. So I hope you are able to think about the game as little as possible. And yeah, I guess from a program, maybe I will do something then solo that night, and or maybe I'll get some kind of a guest or something. But yeah, that's I'm sure Neil, it's good you got it out there, because I'm sure there's going to be there'd be 50 people tweeting at the show, wondering where you're at. So so yeah, you have to get it out there. But yeah, enjoy Epcot, enjoy the time with your family. That is going to be amazing. And yeah, we'll see. I think that you never know what can happen in the NCAA tournament, but I do think that us too, and anyone listening to this is probably cautiously optimistic that the Gators will be able to go on and play in a second weekend. And yeah, so hopefully we still have plenty more games to talk about on this run, and you won't feel left out at all.
All right. Well, on that note, yeah, I'll send us off tonight, and stay tuned for more Patreon materials. Go Gators. Keep attacking closeouts.